Hello, today I'm going to be doing a reading for a new client named Jason, and Jason has requested a first operation of the opening of the key reading. So I've already done the traditional invoking, shuffling, and cutting into the 4 piles, and here we are. So let's give it a go. Okay, in your fire pile, Jason, is the Hierophant. In your water pile is the Lovers. And again, I don't know if you know anything about tarot, so I'm going to pretend that you do not. In your air pile is the Fool. Uh, and your earth pile is the Knight of Cups, which is interesting. I mean, the Knight of Cups is what I used for you as your significator. I forgot to say that at the beginning. I apologize. But it is the card I used to depict you, because you told me that you are a Pisces, and the Knight of Cups is technically a Pisces, but also he is a male water sign and more of the nature of Pisces than the alternative male water card, being the Prince of Cups, who is a little less Pisces-like, and so that was also why I chose the Knight of Cups for you. So I don't know if you know anything about how the first operation works. If you've found my channel and stuff, I assume that you have seen some of the opening of the key stuff. The 4 piles represent. I usually read the 4 piles as aspects of the situation. That's not technically the traditional way of reading it, but experience has shown me that they are all interconnected, which makes sense Kabbalistically as well. They are not necessarily meant to be separated into different categories. Anywho, your fire pile over here is essentially the beginning of the situation, that whatever the situation is for you. It's sort of the original impulse that starts it. Water is that which receives it and sustains it, begins to give it life. Air is sort of the product of the relationship between these two elements, and sort of the resulting problems or issues that come up. And the final earth pile is basically the materialized, more or less the current state of affairs is how I tend to try to see it. And so for the overall beginning of it, you have the Hierophant. And it seems to me, just based on the trajectory that you have, I don't know if you are in the process of finishing or have recently finished school of some kind, and some kind of training, education, that sort of thing. And I want to say that in the water pile, I mean, the fire pile is pretty self-explanatory, as it usually is. I want to say that in your water pile, I'm having a tricky time, but I sort of want to say that you either feel like your education has, in some ways, shown you a lot about who you are to yourself. I could also say that you were exposed to new things, of course, that perhaps inspired you to do something that you were not necessarily expecting to do, and I think that's what we get with the Fool. And the Fool, again, has that sense of being unexpected and being sort of random in a way. And I think the overall idea that was developed from these two experiences, perhaps, again, from from going to school of some kind, encountering different people, more interesting people, or encountering subject matter that interested you in a new way. I think the result of that was to put you on a path or a track that was unexpected, is very exciting to you, I think, but you're not exactly sure necessarily what direction you need to be going in more specifically. And I think the overall result in the physical world is that you're sort of left to your own devices, is kind of the sense I get here. You're given an independence in this situation that is not necessarily one that you're used to. I think, coming out of school, the emphasis of the Hierophant too is that someone else has been showing you along this whole time. You've had mentors, you've had teachers that have clearly had a powerful effect on you. And I think this is the first time, perhaps, in a while or in your life, or I don't know how old you are, but you're given a sort of dangerous freedom, and of course it's a very exciting freedom, but exactly what you're going to do with it is what's confusing. And sorry, itchy eye. Okay, that's basically what I wanted to say about the piles. I almost want to say that you've just finished college, or you've just finished a grad school program of some kind, and now the next step is of course figuring out what the next step is. So again, your significator was the Knight of Cups, so technically we are supposed to discard, so to speak, all these other piles and work with just the earth pile, which is again the pile of the material plane, the sometimes also the monetary aspects of the situation, but not necessarily all the time. It does suggest, however, that the situation as you are going through it currently is primarily physical and primarily materialistic. Perhaps resources are something that you are concerned about. Who isn't right now, or ever for that matter? But let's see what you've got here. Okay, now that we're all spread out here, again, I really apologize for the inability to see everything. I will try to turn my camera to built-in, so your patience is appreciated. So anyway, okay, I'm actually going to, I just finished a draft video of this reading, and I realized it was really confusing, and I don't want to confuse you. And I also, took it in some directions that by the end of it I realized weren't quite right. So I'm going to start over, and hopefully I can do this relatively quickly, concisely, while driving home the important points. So you're going to start, again, my camera is a little tricky to work with here, but you start off here as the Knight of Cups, and I think in general it's saying that you are devoting a lot of energy to celebrating in a way, or enjoying things of pleasure. You're taking a break out of the work-oriented aspect of things and focusing more on your personal happiness. And that's not necessarily a good thing, is what your reading is basically saying. From there we get the Prince of Discs on the opposite end, and it seems like you're forestalling decisions that need to be made. It seems like you don't want to think about them because they're sort of boring. They have to do with logistics, they have to do with planning, they have to do with material things like money, and none of that particularly excites you as a Pisces. It all sort of bores you, perhaps even intimidates you to some extent, and it isn't something necessarily that you want to do. So you're just kind of, in all honesty, you're being a little lazy with it. is basically what the Eight of Cups is hinting at. From there, we get the Ace of Wands, which tells me that you do have a lot of creative potential to do something big. It's just you're still very much in the process of figuring that out, which is what the Fool was saying in that air pile that we talked about at the beginning of your reading. I think being an ace, there's a big ambiguous aspect to it that you haven't quite decoded yet. You haven't figured out exactly what your will, what your purpose is in the grand scheme of things, what it is you want to do. However, I do sort of get the sense that you are a particularly creative person, possibly even artistic to some level, and I'm not sure exactly what medium or field, but I sort of get that impression based on the rest of your reading, and we'll talk about that later. From the Ace, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we get the Seven of Swords, which is telling me that you sort of feel like it's pointless in some ways right now, that even though you should be doing good work, you feel sort of conflicted about exactly what you're supposed to do, and so therefore you're like not worrying about it right now. You sort of feel like it's not a big deal, or like it's not really a thing. You have a sort of nonchalant attitude to the whole thing, even though there are issues that clearly need to be resolved here. From the seven, we get the Eight of Cups, which re-emphasizes your kind of moving away from having to think about it by moving more into pleasurable things, basically distractions. I almost see you as distracting yourself from what you need to do. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, sorry about that. From the Eight of Cups, we come to the Nine of Cups. And I think that based on what it's next to, you generally want to... I mean, my first impression is that you want to go somewhere different, you want to move somewhere, you want to kind of explore your potential prospects here. It could also mean other things that are a little more reckless, sort of like you feel like you're a little indestructible here at the moment. Maybe, maybe not. I think in general the overall idea of this is that you have big ideas, or you have you have a lot of idealism, and that's sort of the track that you tend to find yourself on, is the idealistic one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and from there we get the Five of Wands, which is sort of like that gets you into trouble. People are either taking up issue with you about perhaps I almost want to say your reckless abandon in some ways. I get this sense that you're being a little less I almost want to say that you're not quite being as sober in a way about this. I mean, that's the word that comes to mind, and I'm sorry if that's not quite right, but because the result from this is too angsty for it to be that all that innocent. I almost feel like, and based on the pairing of things, it's almost like drinking and driving. And, I don't know if that's been an issue with you lately, but it's sort of like that, if anything. It's sort of a reckless pursuit of pleasure in almost a fast-paced kind of way. And it seems like people have perhaps found out about that and are not happy about that. It might be your parents, or it could be your friends. Excuse me. Either way, there are pretty substantial issues that are coming up as a result of that. 2, 3, 4, 5. From there, we get the Three of Cups, with the Eight of Cups and you, the Knight of Cups. It's, again, very much like you... That doesn't really fix anything. It's sort of like, even though people aren't necessarily pleased with what you are doing, you're sort of being pretty stubborn about it, I want to say, and you are still, interested in having fun. And I understand, if you are kind of fresh out of college or something, I can understand why you sort of want to just enjoy yourself. And I get that, being only a year out of college. But from there we get the Prince of Discs, and which tells you that hunkering down and doing the boring stuff is inevitable. That is what you are going to have to do eventually, whether you like it or not. If life has to drag you into it kicking and screaming, it will. But you have to do it eventually. And it's almost like the sooner you do it, the better you can do the stuff that you would like to do. The sooner you can ground your idealism into something workable and tangible, the better. I really believe that. Okay, so take a short break, and then I'm going to redo the pairing. Okay, so now we're going to pair from your significator. And our first pair is the Two of Wands and the Three of Cups. And they cancel each other out, technically. In other words, there is a conflict between the two energies here. And the Two of Wands is a card that represents ambition and motivation and willpower and force and fire and vigor and all those good things. And the Three of Cups is more, sometimes it can be the snares of pleasure. It can be things that lure us in because they give us a sort of transitory happiness. It is in some ways the attractiveness of form, philosophically speaking. And those two things are not getting along, which is sort of the basis of what we've been saying all along. That you are sort of wasting your time in some ways by pursuing these more superfluous things. Another pair that cancels out is the Seven of Wands and the Eight of Cups. This is more a conflict between on one hand, it seems like you really are, what's the word I want? Defiant, I guess. You are very passionate about defending yourself and your personal practices. On the other hand, you are very lethargic about other things that are more real ways of, I suppose, establishing yourself and doing what's best for yourself. It's sort of like saying, because we talked a little bit about in the pairing about, or rather in the counting, how even though this is starting to raise pretty big issues with other people, you seem to not be taking that into consideration. And so on one hand, you're really like trying to defend yourself and say, this is what I want to do, sort of screw you in a way. And on the other hand, it's sort of like you're also undercutting that self-defense. You're undercutting and undermining that pride of self by not necessarily getting your tush in gear about stuff with the Eight of Cups. The next pairing is the Five of Wands and the Prince of Discs. And I think that, in general, this is sort of the basis of the conflict. I don't know if you are particularly having conflict with a specific person who is like the Prince of Discs. It could be like, if, as I was saying before, if it's your family. I don't know if your family is kind of conservative with things. or if the other people involved in this are pretty conservative. They, again, I don't know if what you're doing is potentially hazardous to your health. I don't want to assume, but it's sort of like they wouldn't understand that, and they don't see eye to eye with you on that. And so the problem is there. The other way of reading it is that, this part of yourself, the more practical part of yourself that you are denying in this situation, is what you're having conflicts with. I think your conflicts are probably occurring on multiple levels. I think that this is probably something that, again, is taking place in different ways. The tension is manifesting itself differently, probably both interiorly and exteriorly. The next pairing is the Seven of Swords and Adjustment, 2 air cards. And adjustment is very interesting here. It seems like there are big decisions that you need to be making, but you don't feel like you have the motivation to make them in some ways, or you don't feel like the time is right to make them, or something is greatly dissuading you from making them. And it seems to be something that is kind of more mental than anything else. This is the moon in Aquarius, and so the moon being sort of associated with sometimes dangerous forms of pleasure, it could represent that your mind is kind of clouded by things at the moment. The next pairing is the Three of Wands with Lust. And now this is a really strong pairing, and this is a really good pairing, and I think it's saying that the best possible thing for you to do is to ground all your passion and your overall sense of, I almost want to say, self-pride that you are asserting, that we talked about, that you're asserting in other ways right now. It's almost better for you to be, well, it is better for you to be grounding it in something like a career goal. I think that's the big emphasis of this pairing right here. The next pairing is the Moon and the Ace of Wands, and we just talked about how the Moon is sometimes icky in terms of clarity of thought, and so that it's not completely cavernous in here. I want to say that you are lacking in the ability to, again, get over the speed bump in a way, get out of the rut, to get yourself ignited again, because you are sort of in a fog in a way. And I don't know, again, I mean, it might not necessarily be drug related or alcohol related. I mean, they're basically the same thing. But it's in general a sense of confusion about things, and a debilitating sense of confusion that is not helping you. The Ten of Swords and the Six of Swords is the next pairing, and I almost sense that the first time I read this, I said, it feels like you're giving up, and I want to stand by that. It feels like you're giving up the search to figure it out, and to learn from your mistakes, because I think you have perhaps made some mistakes that need to be learned from, and I think, again, you feel your energy is very locked down by, in some ways, the destruction that you are causing. The next pairing is the Five of Discs and the Chariot, and again, I don't want to assume that you've been doing reckless things, but the Chariot is again like there's a big contradiction here, even though they get along elementally. Um, Unlike the first two pairs that we did, technically these get along and so they fuel each other. And it's sort of like saying the more indestructible you think you are, the less support and defense you will actually have. And that is very important for you as you start to create a career for yourself or create a life for yourself, and create a stable financial situation too. That's what I get from this. Again, as I always say, in your feedback, whatever of this is wrong, please feel free to correct me on this. Particularly since this is a very serious reading, and I just got your email telling me to leave it unlisted, and I can see why you would want that. And I was going to make it unlisted after I was halfway through with this anyway. But again, if I have taken this in a terribly wrong direction, I am very sorry, and I am more than happy to try a third time for you, or to just, reshuffle entirely. But we're almost done. So the next pair is the Empress and the Nine of Cups. And I do think that, this is before I alluded to you perhaps having an artistic kind of side. And I think it's saying that your real happiness lies in that. And to not forget that your real source of happiness is more creative and more nurturing and more aesthetic than what you are doing presently. What you are doing presently is very lunar, and it's still feminine, but it's not as good as, I think in this case, the Venus that is represented here by the Empress. And technically, we drew the moon before for you, trump the moon, not the planet, the moon necessarily, because the moon is the priestess. The moon card is Pisces, actually. So you're being very Piscean about all this. It is, you're sort of letting your less desirable natures get in the way of yourself. Even though, again, I keep getting the sense that you do have a lot of fire in you, and it's why you can be very feisty with other people and defending yourself. But you do have to sort of acknowledge that you're not necessarily. I don't think that you're in the right here. I do think that there are things that you need to reevaluate about the present situation and how you're going about it. That's just what I'm getting intuitively. Again, it could be wrong. The overall result of this operation for you is the Princess of Wands, which does still carry that sense of recklessness in a way. And I'm sort of concerned by that. Usually I read the Princess of Wands as being generally pretty good, but given what I've said about everything else, and given what I've read about everything else and the trajectory of this situation, I think it's very likely that the Princess of Wands could represent jumping into potential disaster. However, the hope of this, and the conclusion of your reading is incredibly ambiguous, being a princess, because the princesses are very much the embodiments of the aces. And I don't know if you know anything about tarot. I assume that you do not. And the aces represent potentials only, and they don't really represent manifested things. So the princesses are all about the manifested potential of their respective suits. So she could be anything. She could be, I think in some ways it means that if you sort of pull yourself together here, you could very easily, jump into new territory, either location-wise, career-wise, that sort of thing. You could conceivably do that. It also means that you could continue to be taking a reckless path, and that maybe this is saying that's what you're still taking presently. Again, a lot of your reading was very ambiguous and a little difficult to read. I had a really hard time with this reading, to be perfectly honest with you, which is why I'm glad I did it a second time, really a third time. I read it through once at the beginning to sort of get a sense of it before I said anything about it. But I'm glad that I read it through a full 3 times. So again, if you have any questions for me, any feedback, again, if this was dreadfully wrong or exaggeratedly wrong, if it was too exaggerated in terms of the level of danger here, it is just because I am concerned for your well-being, and I sort of want to be in this case, almost like a parental voice for you, just because I think either way you kind of need it. So again, I hope that this was right. I hope that this was helpful to you, and thank you very much for coming to me for a reading. I do very much appreciate it. I appreciate the patronage and the support, and I wish you nothing but the best in all of this. So thank you again, and I look forward to hearing from you about what you thought. All right, and this will, of course, remain unlisted. Only those of us who have the link, in other words, you and me, will be able to access it. Okay, thank you again. Take care. Bye-bye.